What's up, guys? I just watched this Louder with Crowder video. It's titled The Coronavirus Death Rate is Inflated. Changed my mind. I thought Crowder put in some pretty logical and fair arguments for why the coronavirus death count is actually inflated, and I just wanted to break it down with you. Listen to this to start.
I do believe, I think statistically at this point it's pretty hard to argue against the fact that the COVID death numbers have been inflated dramatically. Yeah.
Why? How do you come to that conclusion? I'm just curious.
Sure. Well, I come to the conclusion from a few. Sorry, that fell. From a few numbers. Well, first off, let me ask you: Do you believe the current death totals that we have that's an accurate assessment?
I have no idea. That's
okay.
why I'm asking the question.
Perfect.
I don't know why you wouldn't think it is. I don't know why someone would lie about it.
Well, I think there are a few reasons that someone might lie about it or might be dishonest regarding that, and that's number one. Let's start where there might be an incentive, and then the statistics that might bear it out.
All right.
Hospital right now gets significantly more revenue if they have a COVID patient versus a non-COVID patient. If they list a non-COVID patient, for example, they might get $5,000 in revenue in some kind of federal relief, United States government relief. They might get up to $13,000 if it's a COVID patient. Now, I understand there are experts who've been on both sides.
Is there a DRG code for COVID?
Yeah.
There's a diagnosis-related group code.
Yeah, there was.
For COVID.
My wife was just in the hospital,
okay,
and they were asking her about it. Yeah.
Interesting.
As far as I understand, I don't know necessarily if it's a DRG code or a separate code, but my wife just came out of the hospital with GBS.
Because that's how
and
you
it was
do
a big deal.
It's a DRG code if you're in a hospital.
Well, then that would be it.
I know a lot about hospitals. Go ahead.
Great. So I do tend to agree with Dr. Burks that it's inflated up to about 25%. Specifically, at least 25%. And let me present to you why I think that's the case. In New York, are you aware of how many of the COVID deaths are actually just not tested at all?
No idea.
25%.
Okay.
No testing at all. In Colorado recently, they said, well, hold on a second, we need to get some more accurate data here because, as you know, listen, there's a lot of data that comes in, and I do reserve the right to change my mind because data does change, especially in the pandemic.
And there's a lot of deaths.
Right. There have been a significant amount of deaths.
Are you telling me
in Colorado,
okay,
in Colorado, they decided to finally differentiate between deaths from COVID and deaths with COVID because, like New York, every single death where COVID was found in the system was being counted as a COVID death.
Correct.
So they said, we're going to differentiate that.
That makes sense.
The death total came down by, and they're the first state that did that. Colorado. The death state was reduced by how much, do you guess?
I don't know, 25%.
25%. Every single death from nursing homes in the last several months, every single death, regardless of a test or not, has been listed as a COVID death in the United States. 25% of all deaths in any given month in the United States come from nursing homes. So when you look at all those numbers in tandem, and you see how every death, or in most states certainly, except for states like Colorado, death with COVID in the system is being counted. And as we revise those numbers, there seems to be good reason for experts like Dr. Burks, and I mean, there are several experts on all sides, obviously. We had experts who said we would have 2 million deaths from the Imperial College in London, and Neil Ferguson, I believe, had to resign. I think there's a pretty strong case to be made at this point that the death totals, which are the most reliable indicator we have been inflated.
So let me ask you a question. How would you confirm?
Would you mind moving in a little bit?
Sure.
I don't think anyone
After a death, how would you confirm that it was COVID? Do you do an autopsy? What do you do?
Yeah, well, we should at least do that.
No,
at least do something.
What is done?
Well, right now it's just a COVID test. So in other words, if it comes up positive for COVID, period, it's a COVID death. Let me ask you this. Do you believe that George Floyd had COVID in his system? Do you believe he died from COVID?
No.
Okay, neither do I.
Right.
And a mere few weeks ago, that certainly would have been registered as a COVID death. So it's tough because we don't have the statistics on every single COVID case. But here in Texas, actually, a good example. Are you aware of the first COVID death in Texas?
No.
First COVID death was a 97-year-old who already had an underlying condition. I've been trying to search high and low for the underlying condition. Can't get access to it anywhere. I would list maybe underlying condition that he's 97. That could be one of the confounding factors there. But go ahead, I know you have a question.
No. So what you're saying is there is no autopsy done routinely on patients that die who have COVID. Therefore, you can't really say whether they've died from COVID or something else.
No, that's not. I'm actually saying it's worse than that, in that there are definitive cases where doctors, health professionals know that the death is not the direct cause of COVID, and they list it as COVID anyway.
Because you're saying because there's a financial incentive? Is that what you're
There's quite a few incentives. I mean, there's no doubt. I mean, I think we'd probably agree that it's been politicized for better or worse at this point.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And so that's why you have experts who come out and say, right, everyone.
Okay, so I'm just going to do a voiceover of this part of the Louder Rick Crowder because he kind of gets stuck in a little bit of a hole. Basically, all he says is he hypes himself up because he was selling masks when the CDC was saying not to sell masks, so he knew to sell masks before everybody else. And then he kind of highlights the negative sides of inflating the coronavirus epidemic. He says, for example, his wife needed to go to the hospital, but it was all reserved for coronavirus people that never came into the hospital. And this led to people needing to get into the hospital not being able to.
Looked at all of the above, and the reason I think that they are inflating the deaths is because it's been politicized at this point. For better or worse, they want to blame the United States government for not being prepared for it, for the same reason they said 2 million dead, that they've advocated lockdowns and continued it. There is a financial incentive, and I think a lot of the time people just don't want to admit that they're wrong.
Okay, and that's pretty much the main arguments that Crowder gives against or for why the death rate of coronavirus is inflated. To summarize it very concisely, hospitals have a financial incentive to say they have more coronavirus people than they do. It makes sense. There's a financial incentive for hospitals because coronavirus is supposed to be really dangerous. They're going to need more money. If they report more coronavirus cases, they get more money from the federal government. That incentivizes hospitals to release more cases of death and infections. The other points that lead to Crowder saying the death rate is inflated in hospitals is because the method that hospitals are using to determine if somebody died from coronavirus are not very rigorous. They are reporting pretty much everybody that dies, if there's coronavirus in the system, as a coronavirus death, but we are ignoring a few people who maybe shouldn't be counted as a coronavirus death. For example, later on in the interview, he cites an example in Michigan where somebody killed themselves or tried to kill themselves, They messed up their body pretty bad. They got coronavirus while they were in the hospital, and then they died, but they were going to die anyway. But that counted as a coronavirus death. In the interview, Crowder states the coronavirus death rate is probably exaggerated about 25%. So I just want to say that too, because just because it's exaggerated 25%, I mean, there's still a very, very large number of people who have died from coronavirus. Crowder gives very concise arguments, I would argue. I believe Crowder when he says the coronavirus death rate is exaggerated. However, I see a lot of people taking this fact and running with it and saying that all the lockdowns should be shut down. Frankly, from what I've heard, I think that it's likely that we kind of messed up by not locking down harder, or at least the United States did. And even though the death rate is exaggerated, there are other negative effects that could be coming from this. And I guess the future will hold what happens. I could be wrong. I could be right.